Dear friends, welcome to this week's virtual Drasha. This week we have the incredible privilege to read the parashos of Matos and Maasei, and Emir Hashem have the incredible zchus of finishing Sefer Bamidbar. And in Parashas Matos, the Torah goes into great detail of the war against Midian. The Jewish army mobilizes, goes to war against Midian to really avenge the terrible sin visited upon us by the nation of Midian. Remember, after Bilam failed to curse us, he counseled Balak to lure the Jewish men into a web of immorality, and the nation participated in this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Sararas HaMidyanim, literally again, avenge Klal Yisrael, avenge all those who were lost in a plague, avenge all of those who have lost their spiritual footing, and Klal Yisrael goes out to war against Midian. We are successful, wildly successful, and part of that success was the accumulation of incredible wealth. And Klal Yisrael brings back all the different gold and the silver and the utensils, and it is here that the Ribono Shel Olam introduces us to the halachos of hechsher kelim, kashering, because amongst the spoils of war, they had accumulated utensils used by the Midyanim in their everyday life, and as such, again, these utensils had absorptions from non-kosher food and therefore had to be kashered. In addition to that, of course, there's the halacha that any time that a Jew acquires a utensil from a non-Jew, one is obligated to immerse it in a mikvah. And the Torah, when discussing the halachos of kashering, gives a very simple formula. You know, in halacha, this formula is called kibolo kach polto. The way that a utensil absorbs the flavor or the absorptions ultimately is the same way that you could purge the utensil of the absorptions. So whatever mechanism of cooking or whatever heat mechanism the utensil is used with, that's how you extract. So therefore, for example, the Torah says if a utensil is used with fire, so again, you have a utensil that's used for cooking, it's used with fire, so it absorbs with fire, and therefore the way to extract the absorptions is with fire as well. We know this. This is Hilchos, the halachos of kashering 101. We're familiar with this for Pesach, for throughout the year. The concept, again, in halacha, kibolo kach polto. The way a utensil absorbs is the same mechanism through which one is able to purge that very same utensil of its absorptions. And the Torah says, Perek Lamed Aleph Pasuk Chav Gimel, chapter 31, verse 23, Kol davar asher yavo ba'esh ta'aviru ba'esh v'taher. Any item that is used with fire, literally again, any object, utensil that comes into fire, ta'aviru ba'esh, bring it through fire again, v'taher, and you will purify it. Again, highlighting the concept that we just spoke about. If you use it for cooking with fire, it absorbs through fire, therefore you could expunge the absorptions with fire as well. But there is a beautiful insight by the Chidah, the great tzaddik Rav Chaim David Azulai, Zech Tzaddik v'Kadosh Levrach, and the Chidah writes as follows. He says, Kol davar, now the phrase of the pasuk is Kol davar asher yavo ba'esh, which literally we translate, anything, any utensil that comes into fire, ta'aviru ba'esh, put it into fire again, v'taher, and ultimately it will be purified. And the Chidah has a magnificent insight. The Chidah writes, Kol davar asher yavo ba'esh. What does it mean when it says any item? Kol davar, any item asher yavo, that comes with fire. He says this refers to the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the internal self-sabotaging mechanisms of man. You know, so often when we sin, we don't just sin, right? We don't just sin like, it's interesting. A lot of times in life, I do things lethargically or kind of half-hearted. It is interesting to note that whenever it comes to Averos, there's a lot of Hislavos, there's a lot of Zrizlos, there's a lot of excitement. Rarely does a person sin half-heartedly, or rarely does a person sin lethargically. Says the Chidah, Kol davar asher yavo ba'esh. That thing, that davar, that always comes with fire, that always comes with passion, that always comes with excitement, that's the Yetzer Hara, says the Chidah. It's referring to the internal self-sabotaging mechanisms that so often cause us to pull the rug out from underneath ourselves, that cause us to undermine our own personalistic growth. Kol davar, that thing, that Yetzer Hara, asher yavo ba'esh, that always comes with incredible fire, with incredible passion, with incredible zeal, with incredible alacrity. What do I do about it? How do I combat my Yetzer Hara? No, Chavra, isn't this the $1 million question? I'm struggling with the Yetzer Hara day in and day out, and so many of us, it's not just one Yetzer Hara I'm struggling with. I'm struggling with so many different things, often all at the same time. The davar, the Yetzer Hara, it doesn't just come at me, but it comes at me ba'esh, with fire, with excitement, with intensity. And I want to resist it. I want to overcome it. I want to somehow keep it in its place, even if I can't fully conquer it. How do I do that? And the Chidah says, look at the last part of the pasuk. Ta'aviru ba'esh v'taher. Take the fire of the Yetzer Hara. Take the intensity of the Yetzer Hara and bring it into another fire. And what's the other fire? What's the other fire, says the Chidah? Ta'aviru oso ba'ish shel Torah. Take the fire of the Yetzer Hara and bring it into the fire of Torah. And if you're able to do that, vitaher, then you will be able to lead a life of purity. Then you'll be able to not necessarily, vanquish and not necessarily destroy the Yetzer Hara, but you'll be able to subdue it. So the Chidah teaching us that embedded in this pasuk, which just seemingly talks about the halachos of kashering utensils, is a pasuk that addresses the fundamental core struggle of life, called davar asheya. I'm always struggling with the davar. I'm always struggling with Yetzer Hara. And it's not just enough that I struggle with Yetzer Hara. Yetzer Hara comes at me full force, ba'ish, with fire. So Chidah says, but Torah Baruch Hu says, okay, I created the Yetzer Hara and I'll tell you how to deal with it. Ta'aviru ba'ish. Take that fire of the Yetzer Hara, bring it into the fire of Torah, vitaher, and you'll be purified. And I think what the Chidah is teaching us is a profound idea. In general, there are two different ways in which we have the ability to tackle sin. We have the ability to tackle hate. So sin generally never just occurs. Sin is the result of a whole variety of preceding acts. And some of them are maybe even relatively innocuous or not necessarily inherently sinful. But after enough time of engaging in the wrong acts, the wrong decisions, again, even if the individual things are themselves not harmful, it culminates in hate. So this part of the process of tshuva, part of the process of dealing with the Yetzer Hara, is understanding, how did I get here, right? So I look at the hate. So all too often, all we do is we look at the sin itself. We don't look at how we got here. How did I get to this point? How did I make this mistake? Let me unravel this and understand all of the precipitating circumstances that led me to this result of hate. There's introspection. There's understanding, why did I do this? Why did I feel the need to do this? What's lacking in my life that I needed to sin? In other words, when I sin, it's because I'm trying to fill a void. I'm trying to give myself something. Like the Gemara says, person doesn't sin if there's not some kind of benefit for them. So obviously, if I'm sinning, I think I'm going to get something out of it. Is there something missing in my life? Is there some emptiness? So there's the process of tshuva that occurs through introspection. But there's another model of tshuva. And the other model of tshuva is that a person says, you know what? Maybe I'm not ready for the introspection. Maybe I'm not ready to go through that entire previously outlined process. But yet I want to turn my life around. There's another model. The other model is infuse your life with so much good that the Yetzer Hara, that the davar, is unable to exist. Create a personality of holiness. Create a life of holiness. Create an identity of holiness. And the davar, the Yetzer Hara, is simply unable to exist in the same way that a light, that a fire, can't exist without oxygen. If I create a personal space of incredible holiness, the davar, the Yetzer Hara, can't exist there either. And perhaps that's what the Chidah is saying. Kol davar asher yavo ba'esh. If I'm struggling with that davar, with that Yetzer Hara, and not just struggling with the Yetzer Hara, but struggling with the Yetzer Hara that comes at me with fire, with excitement, with zeal, or guns blazing. So what do? And let's say I'm not ready to introspect, and I'm not ready to go ahead and dissect, and I'm not ready to go ahead through that exhaustive process of tshuva, which we'll get to later on in a couple of months from now. I'm not ready for that. Okay, there's another model. Taviru ba'esh v'taher. Create another fire. Create a fire of holiness. Create a fire of Kiddusha. Create a fire of personalistic ascension, spiritual ascension and illumination. V'taher. And you'll become purified from the negative fire of the davar, the Yetzer Hara. Create a life of holiness. And that prevents the Yetzer Hara from gaining incredible fire-like traction. Two different models. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, in the 5th chapter, discusses the 10 miracles that occurred in the Beis HaMikdash. And one of those miracles was, the Mishnah says, "V'lo haya zvuv bebeis mitbachim." There was never a fly in the slaughter area of the Beis HaMikdash. A lot of animals were slaughtered in the Beis HaMikdash. And one would think, again, where there's all those liquids, bodily fluids, and blood, okay, you get the point. There'd be flies everywhere. No flies. Rabbi Shalom Meir Lau, in his parish on Pirkei Avos, says something so beautiful. He explains that the fly, the zvuv, he says, represents the Yetzer Hara. And the idea is that the Yetzer Hara can't exist in a Beis HaMikdash. Meaning, when you create an atmosphere of holiness, the Zvuv, the fly of the Yetzer Hara, the Davar of the Yetzer Hara, cannot go ahead and exist. And perhaps that's our avoda during these days. In these days, when we mourn that which we have lost, we mourn the absence of a Beis HaMikdash. So what do I do with that? In general, it's so hard for us to relate to this time of year. It's so hard for us to relate to the 9 days, to the 3 weeks, to Rosh Chodesh Av, to Tisha B'Av, and of course, again, this year with the tragedies of October 7th of Simchas Torah and the continuing war, we'll be able to relate to Churban in a different contemporary way. But from a historical perspective, it's difficult sometimes to connect to a Beis HaMikdash. And perhaps our avodah is not necessarily to try to mourn for something for which we have no frame of reference, but perhaps our avodah is to be able to build up the personal mikdash. That in the absence of the Beis HaMikdash, and as we anticipatorily wait and pine for the third Beis HaMikdash, our avodah is to build up the personal mikdash, to build myself into a mikdash, the Bilvavi Mishkan Evna, to create myself into a personalistic space of incredible and dramatic, beautiful holiness. And that's beautiful in and of itself. But it's even more beautiful when you contemplate it. If I build myself into a mikdash, if I build myself into a temple, then ultimately, again, that prevents the Yetzer Hara from taking root. It prevents the negativity from kind of like exerting its grip on me. We all struggle with this Yetzer Hara, right? Many of us, one type of Yetzer Hara, I think most of us, multiple streams of the Yetzer Hara, and there are strategies, and there are ideas, and there's tshuva, and there's all incredible things, and there's not one strategy for it, but perhaps our strategy during these days of Bein HaMitzarim, our strategy during these days when we mourn the absence of the Beis HaMikdash, is to create a personal Beis HaMikdash. What can I do to infuse more holiness into myself? What can I do to create a sacred space within myself? What can I do to increase and to heighten and to amplify my level of personal holiness? Because if I could figure out what to do, and it doesn't even have to be anything all that big, but if I could figure out what to do with myself, then suddenly again the Zvuv, the fly of the Yetzer Hara, has no place by me because I'm a mikdash. And suddenly again the Davar, the Yetzer Hara, that normally comes ba'ish with incredible fire, can't burn because there's already another fire there. Ta'avirum ba'ish is another fire, a fire of holiness that's already burning. And that fire of holiness burns much brighter and much more intense than the fire of the Yetzer Hara. So maybe be Zochem Eretz Hashem, that over the course of these next few days, the remaining days of this Bein HaMitzarim period, we should be Zochem Eretz Hashem, to be able to receive that gift that we have been yearning for and pining for thousands of years, our third Beis HaMikdash. We should be Zochem Eretz Hashem, to rejoice in it and to sing and dance in it and to bring our kabbalos and to daven Mehir Rabbi Amida. But until that day, let's work on building ourselves into an individual Beis HaMikdash, a personal Beis HaMikdash. Let's work on what we can each do to make ourselves into an individual space of personalistic holiness. If we fan that fire of personal holiness, if I make myself into that personal mikdash, then the Yetzer Hara will not be able to get a hold of me. Then the evil inclination, the internal self-sabotaging mechanisms will no longer be able to pull the rug out from underneath my dynamic personalistic accomplishment. The fly won't be able to hover around, and the davar won't be able to attack me like Aish, because the fire of holiness burns within me. And when that fire of holiness burns, and the brighter it burns, the more it keeps away all of the negative things, and the more it lights my way for the beautiful journey ahead. Wishing everyone a good Erev Shabbos and a beautiful Shabbos Kodesh.